In this video, we will learn how to multiply and divide integers. So good news is multiplying and dividing integers have the same rules. And in my opinion, it's easier to wrap our head around multiplying and dividing integers than adding and subtracting. So when we're multiplying integers, if the numbers we have that we're multiplying are both positive, stays positive, right? So if I have a 5 times a 5, you guys have been doing that forever, that's 25. But also, what may be a little bit different is if the signs are both negative. So if I have a negative times a negative, my answer will yield positive. Okay, so it doesn't matter if I have a negative times a negative, will give you a positive. Or again, if I have a positive times a positive, will also give us a positive, like you've been doing forever. If the signs are different, if I have a positive and a negative number and I'm multiplying, it doesn't matter which is larger. If I have a positive times a negative, no matter what, my answer will always be negative. Okay, so again, it doesn't matter the size of the number. Okay, so it doesn't matter where that negative lives, and that was the case when we add and subtracted integers. Okay, so really shortcut rule here, if I have a positive times a positive, I will always get a positive, right? If I have a negative times a negative, I will always get a positive. And lastly, if I have a positive times a negative, I will always get a negative. Again, it doesn't matter which number carries the negative sign. Good news is, same rules apply for division. So as long as my numbers are the same, if I have two negatives or two positives, my answer will always be positive. Okay, so for example here, if I have a negative 5 divided by negative 5, I now get a positive 1. And again, same rules for dividing integers as multiply. If my signs are different, if I have a positive and a negative, no matter what, my answer will be negative. So positive 5 divided by a negative 5 will give us a negative 1. So the rules here really are exactly the same. So really you could put, if you choose, you could also put when I multiply or divide two positives, I get a positive. Or if I multiply two negatives or divide two negatives, my answer will always be positive. And again, if signs are opposite, if I have different signs and I divide two different signs, my answer will always be negative. So let's look at some examples and apply this knowledge. So here, if I have a positive 6 times a negative 8, remember when a number is touching parentheses, it also means multiply. So 6 times negative 8, I have one negative, one positive, so my answer is going to be negative. 6 times 8 is 48. I really encourage you guys to pause the video and try some of these problems before we go through them together. Next, I have a negative times a negative is a positive. 5 times 9 is 45. Negative 63 divided by negative 9. Negative divided by a negative is a positive. 9 goes into 63 7 times. Number 4, a negative divided by a positive is a negative. 9 goes into 36 4 times. So I hope you're seeing that these are a little bit easier than adding and subtracting. Next row, I have a negative 72, a positive 36. I'm going to skip number 7 for now. Number 8, 36 divided by negative 3 is a negative 12. So I have one negative, one positive. For number 7, we have options. We talked about in the past how multiplication is commutative, meaning we can change the order around. So you could just solve these two, then these two. So let's look at the first set here. A negative times a negative is a positive 15. Times a negative 1 times a positive 3 is a negative 3. Now we can do this. A positive times a negative is a negative. 3 15s is 45, so it'll be a negative 45. You could also view this as if I have an odd number of negatives, here 1, 2, 3, I always have like this man out, right? Because two negatives make a positive when I multiply them. So this loner, this -1, really determines that sign, right? It's pretty handy. I'm going to go down actually to number 14. And if we look at that one too, if I have a negative times a negative, I know that's going to make a positive. And a negative times a negative makes another positive. So this answer would be positive. Now I can just multiply my numbers, right? 1 times 2 is 2. 3 times 4 is 12. Multiply the 2. I get a positive 24. Right? So if you have an odd number of negatives, your answer will be negative. If you have an even number of negatives, because they all partner up, every 2 partners up to make a positive, your answer will be positive. All right, number 9, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Number 10, another way to write division, 63 over -9 is a -7. Number 11, here's a little review. If we have a square, that means times itself. Right, so this is really -3/4 times -3/4. And review of fractions, when you multiply fractions, you just go straight across, right? So -3 times a -3 is a positive 9. 4 times 4 is 16. So -3/4 squared is equal to 9/16, positive 9/16. Number 12, 3 times -9 is a -27. Number 13, again, when their parentheses are touching, there's no operation visible there. That's multiply. Negative times negative is a positive. 15, we have -6. And 16, 2 negatives being divided is a positive. 8 goes into 56 7 times. All right, so multiplying and dividing integers, I hope you are finding it's a little bit easier to wrap our head around than adding and subtracting. This again, just like adding and addition, or addition and subtraction of integers, same thing goes for multiply and divide. As far as the further we move up the math ladder, the more you guys will start seeing this in algebra, right? These are topics that will continue to come up, right? So just a little side conversation here. If I had something like this, a -x times a -x, we're going to use those same rules. A negative times a negative is a positive. X times x is really x squared, right? So we're going to, all this knowledge you're learning now just is building you to this higher level math here that you're so capable of, but this foundation is super, super important to wrap our head around. So I hope you enjoyed these videos. I hope it's making more sense. Now what I'd like you to do is practice in IXL and get comfortable with it yourself.